Montana Territory. June 1887, the wind was dry and sharp as a blade when the train hissed to a halt in the middle of nowhere. Mara Glenhaven stepped down onto the wooden platform, her boots clicking softly. Her hands trembled as they clutched the strap of her valise. She had never been west of the Mississippi before today. The mountains in the distance were jagged and cold-looking, and the sky stretched out like forever. There was no one here to greet her. She scanned the dusty platform. No man in a pressed suit or clean boots. No bouquet of flowers. Just a few station hands and a boy chasing a dog by the tracks. Her fiancé was supposed to be here. She had arrived with a letter in her pocket and a promise made over 3 months of correspondence. He had written her from this very town, said he had a small ranch, a good stretch of land, and dreams of a wife and family. She had read those letters over and over on the train, believing every word. But now, nothing. Mara stood alone while the train clattered back down the line, heading west. The silence it left behind pressed at her chest. She felt foolish and cold, even though the sun was strong. She sat on the bench, set her valise beside her, and folded her hands in her lap. Her wedding dress was packed carefully in the trunk the porter had hauled off the train. She had sewn every stitch of it herself. A full hour passed. Then another. A man walked by once, a rancher by the look of him, but he gave her only a glance and kept walking. Her throat ached. She did not cry, not here, not yet. Another hour passed. Then a voice. "You waiting on someone, miss?" She looked up. He was tall, with sun-browned skin and dark blonde hair that curled a little at the ends. His shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows and his hat was pulled low. He had kind eyes, honest ones. "Yes," she said. I was supposed to meet someone. "My fiancé. I was coming here to marry." The cowboy nodded once. He did not ask questions right away, just looked around, calm and quiet, then met her eyes again. "I can sit with you a while, if that is all right." She hesitated, then nodded. He sat beside her on the bench, not too close. He rested his hands on his knees. "I am Holden Oakes," he said. "My ranch is about 2 miles west of town. I was delivering a horse to the blacksmith, saw you sitting here." "Mara Glenhaven," she said softly. He nodded again. "You sure this man did not say which train he would meet you on?" He said the noon train. "This one?" Holden looked down the road. "Then it seems he is not coming." Mara looked away. Her throat tightened. Holden was quiet for a while, then he stood. "I will not leave you sitting here alone. You can come back to my ranch if you want. My sister is there with her husband and their baby. You will be safe with us." Mara looked up, uncertain. "I will sleep in the barn if it makes you feel better," he said. "You will not be alone." She nodded slowly. "All right." Holden picked up her valise and led her toward a wagon tied at the post. He helped her up gently, gave her space to sit proper, then climbed onto the bench beside her. The ride was slow, the road rough. Dust kicked behind the wheels and the sun dipped lower. They passed wide fields, a trickling creek, and finally reached a modest ranch house set against a line of hills. A barn stood nearby. A woman stepped out onto the porch holding a toddler on her hip. She had Holden's same eyes. "Mara, this is my sister Clara," Holden said. "Clara, we have a guest." Clara's face softened. "Come inside, honey, you look done in." Mara stepped down from the wagon and followed Clara into the house. It was small but clean. A fire burned low in the stove. The child on Clara's hip reached out a chubby hand toward Mara. "This is Daisy," Clara said with a fond smile. "She is almost 2. You can sleep in the spare room. It is not much, but it is warm." Mara managed a quiet thank you. Clara gave her a cup of tea and asked no hard questions. She just let her sit there, surrounded by simple kindness. Later that night, Mara stood on the porch. The stars were out, bright and sharp. She heard footsteps behind her. Holden leaned on the rail beside her, arms folded. "I am sorry he did not come," he said. She nodded. "I do not know what I will do now," she said. "We will figure it out," he said simply. "You do not owe him anything anymore. You are here now. That is what matters." Mara looked at him. His voice held no pity, only steadiness. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Holden looked toward the hills. Because I would not want my sister left alone like that, and because I know what it feels like to be left behind. She did not ask more. They stood quiet together in the dark. The air turned colder and he offered her his jacket. She took it. The next morning, Mara rose early and helped Clara with breakfast. She swept the floor, fed the chickens, and helped wash laundry in the big tin tub. It felt good to move, to be useful. By evening, she was sitting on the porch again. Holden came up from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I can take you into town tomorrow," he said, "if you want to see the sheriff or send a message back east." She looked down. "Thank you." He sat beside her again. "I do not know what I will do yet," she said, "but I do not want to go back, not yet." Holden nodded. "You can stay here as long as you need. No charge, no strings." She looked at him, eyes searching. "You are a good man," he shrugged. "I try to be." She smiled a little. He looked at her then, steady and quiet. "You deserve better than what you were handed." Her throat caught again. But this time the tears came with warmth, not shame. "I do not know what I was thinking," she said, "trusting someone like that." "You wanted a home," Holden said. "That is not foolish." She turned her face toward his. "Maybe I can still find one." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said it soft, simple, but sure. "If you stay, I will not let you down." She blinked. "What?" "I do not make promises easy, but I will make this one. You will never wait alone again, not if you stay here." Mara looked at him, heart pounding. She saw no lies in his eyes, no hunger, no plan. "Just truth," she whispered. "That sounds a lot like a vow." Holden nodded once. "It is." And for the first time since she stepped off that train, Mara felt something strong settle in her chest. Not fear, not doubt, hope. The morning sun had just cleared the ridgeline when Holden hitched 2 horses to the wagon. Clara stood nearby, fastening Daisy's shawl, her eyes flicking between her brother and Mara. "You sure you want to go out there?" Clara asked, voice low. Mara adjusted the sleeves of her dress. "I need to see what's mine. I left everything behind for something I thought was real. Maybe there's still a letter waiting, or someone who knows what happened." Holden didn't answer right away. He handed her up into the wagon with a steady hand and climbed in beside her, reins in hand. Clara gave a nod, then turned back toward the porch, Daisy beginning to fuss in her arms. They rolled into town under a sky that had gone pale with heat. Windows were open along the main street, and a few men leaned against the mercantile wall with nothing pressing to do. Dust clung to the wagon wheels. Mara watched the buildings pass the blacksmith, a livery, a faded hotel, and tried not to feel like a trespasser. Holden pulled up in front of the telegraph office. The operator, a man with a crooked smile and ink-stained fingertips, looked up from behind the counter. "You remember a man named Silas Crowley?" Holden asked. "Said he was expecting a bride." The operator scratched his chin. "Yeah, sent a few wires for him. Last one he sent was near a month back. Said he was headed North Dakota Territory, I think. Mentioned a claim he was chasing. Didn't say nothing about no bride." Mara kept her jaw still. "Did he leave an address?" "No, ma'am. Just said he'd write when he settled." Holden nodded once, thanked the man, and led her back out into the street. They stopped outside the general store next. Mara stepped in alone. The bell above the door rang soft. A woman with gray hair pinned in a tight coil glanced up from a barrel of molasses tins. "You're Miss Glenhaven, aren't you?" Mara's mouth parted. "Yes." The woman wiped her hands on her apron. "That man, Silas. He barely paid his account before he left town. Bought a new rifle, some dried beans, said he was bound for fortune. Never mentioned you, I'm sorry." Mara's fingers curled around the edge of the counter. "You don't need to be." Outside, Holden had moved to water the horses. She joined him in silence, and they rode out without a word. Halfway back to the ranch, she broke it. "I think I knew. When the train stopped, I think I already knew he wasn't coming." Holden's hands tightened on the reins, but he said nothing. "I left Massachusetts with 2 trunks and a promise. That was all. My father said I was foolish. My sister wouldn't look me in the eye." "You left because you wanted something better," Holden said finally. "That don't make you foolish." She turned her face into the wind. "It makes me unwise. I gave up my name to become someone's wife. And now I'm nobody." You're not nobody, she looked at him. Holden, you're someone who wakes early, helps where she's not asked. You know how to tie a fence knot even if your hands aren't calloused yet. You remembered to check the chicken's water before breakfast, her throat caught. That's not much. It's more than most women I've known. The wagon creaked beneath them as they hit a rut. A meadowlark startled up from the roadside. I don't know how to start over, she said. You already did, Holden replied. Back at the ranch, Clara had stew simmering. The air smelled of onions and thyme. Mara helped slice bread, her hands steadier than they'd been all day. That evening, Holden brought her a small wooden box. What's this? She asked. Some things from my mother, he said. She passed when I was 16. Clara took most of what mattered, but this was in the back of the barn, thought you might use it. Mara opened it carefully. Inside were bits of calico, a silver thimble, 2 bone-handled buttons, and a spool of blue thread. At the bottom, folded neat, was a needlework sampler with faded letters stitched in careful rows. She looked up at him, uncertain. I figured if you wanted to sew something, you shouldn't have to ask. Her voice came quiet. No one's ever given me something like this. Holden shrugged, but his eyes stayed on hers. There's a lot of things I'd give you if you'd let me. She ran her fingers over the sampler, then closed the lid. I'm not ready to belong to someone again. I don't want you to, Holden said. I want you to belong to yourself. Then maybe you'd choose me. Her breath caught. He stepped back, giving her space. I'll be in the barn. The door clicked softly behind him. That night, Mara lay awake staring at the ceiling. Wind moved gentle through the cracks in the shutters. She thought of her mother's hands threading needles, of the way Holden had looked at her without asking anything in return. Somewhere past midnight, she rose and lit a candle. She opened the box again and set the sampler in her lap. She didn't touch the needle or thread. She just sat there, holding the past in her hands. And for the first time since she'd left home, she didn't feel ashamed of where she'd come from or afraid of where she was. She was still here, and someone had seen her. Not as a shameful mistake or a burden, but as a woman standing on her own 2 feet. She folded the sampler once more and with careful hands tucked it beneath her pillow. The summer deepened. Dry heat settled into the valley, and the grass along the fence line turned brittle and gold. Mara took to walking the perimeter in the early hours, a wide-brimmed hat shading her face, the hem of her skirt brushing against thistle and wild oat. She carried a small tin pail most mornings, collecting speckled eggs from the hens before the sun warmed their coop too much. Clara had shown her how to tell which ones were fresh. Holden had been out mending the east pasture gate when she found him. He was kneeling in the dirt beside a post, hammer in one hand, a twisted wire in the other. His shirt clung damp at the back, and he didn't look up until she knelt beside him. I found a split in the trough plank, she said. The one near the orchard tree. I'll take a look, he said, setting the hammer down. Might be the nails worked loose in the heat. She watched him for a moment, the way his forearms moved as he twisted the wire snug again. His hands carried nicks and old scars, but they moved with quiet certainty. I'd like to learn, she said. He looked at her, brow lifted slightly. How to fix things, Mara added. Not just sew or sweep. I want to be useful, not just helpful. Holden leaned back on his heels. All right. I'll show you. You'll hurt your hands some, but you'll get the feel of it. She picked up the hammer. Later that afternoon, with her palms still tender, she sat beneath the cottonwood near the barn, darning a tear in one of Clara's aprons. Holden joined her, bringing a tin cup of cool well water. He sat on the ground across from her, one knee bent, his hat shading his eyes. You always quiet when you work? He asked, watching her fingers move. I think better when I'm quiet, she said. Holden nodded. I figure a lot of folks talk too much when they don't know what to say. She glanced at him, then back at the fabric. I used to talk to fill silences. Back home, it made me feel like I was useful, but here it's different. The quiet doesn't feel empty. He ran a thumb over the rim of his cup. That's how I know I'm home, when quiet doesn't press on me, just settles in. She folded the apron carefully once the thread was secure. Did you ever think of leaving? She asked. Once, he said. After my father died, I drove cattle south, ended up in Texas for a season. Thought maybe I'd find something bigger, but I missed this land, even the hard parts. She leaned against the trunk, legs stretched out. I don't miss Boston, not even the way I thought I would. I don't miss the gas lamps or the streetcars or the church bells. Holden looked at her steadily. What do you miss? My mother's humming, she said. She used to hum when she ironed, always the same tune. I can't remember the melody now, I try, but it slips away. He didn't speak, just watched the wind move her hair against her cheek. And I miss lilacs, she added after a long pause. They bloomed behind our kitchen window every spring. The rest doesn't matter. I'll plant you some, he said. She blinked. Lilacs don't grow easy out here. I'll find a way, he said. You shouldn't have to forget everything sweet just to be here. She felt something shift in her chest, quiet and slow. That evening she found a small bundle on her pillow, a pair of worn gloves, soft with use, the fingertips patched in places. Holden's, clearly. There was nothing written, no note. Just the gift. She wore them the next morning, and when he saw her approach the fence line, he didn't say a word. Just handed her the pliers and nodded toward the next post. They worked side by side until noon, the sun climbing high, sweat trailing down their jaws. He showed her how to check the tension in the wire, how to brace her foot against the post for leverage. She didn't complain when her arm ached or when her skirt caught on the sharp edge of a nail. Later, while they washed up at the pump, Holden handed her a clean cloth. You don't flinch at the hard parts, he said. I flinch, Mara replied. I just do it anyway, he smiled, just barely. That's what I meant. That night, Clara brought out a basket of fresh peaches from a neighbor's orchard down valley. They sat on the porch, the three of them, with Daisy asleep on Clara's lap, and the sky streaked lavender and gold. Mara peeled one with her pocket knife, juice slipping down her wrist. Holden reached for another, his fingers brushing hers. I was thinking, he said, we could build a coop farther from the house, give the hens more space. She looked up. You want help? Wouldn't ask if I didn't, he said. She nodded. Then I'll be there. The porch fell quiet again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. And when Holden stood and offered his hand to help her rise, she took it without hesitation. His fingers were warm, rough like the land around them, and steady as the promise he hadn't made again but hadn't needed to. She knew it was still there, same as before. Waiting. The wood for the new coop arrived by wagon from a sawmill 3 valleys over, and Holden spent the better part of a morning hauling planks from the stack to the edge of the orchard. Mara joined him, boots scuffing the dry ground, arms full of cedar slats that left a trace of scent on her skin. He marked out the ground with a length of twine and 4 stakes, and she helped square the corners, adjusting the line until it sat just right. They spent the next several days working in long stretches of silence, broken only by the sound of hammer against nail and the low rhythm of their breath. Mara learned how to brace a beam with her shoulder while Holden leveled it, how to steady a ladder in uneven soil, how to notch 2 boards so they nestled close without shifting. Her hands toughened. One afternoon, as she steadied a crossbeam above her head, Holden paused to study the sky beyond her. You ever live where the land just runs flat? He asked. No rise, no bend, just open? No, she said, glancing at him under the brim of her hat. Boston's all edges and corners. You have to look up to see the sky, he nodded. I worked a trail once through Kansas, nothing but wind and horizon. I thought I'd like it. I didn't. Felt like there was nowhere to rest your eyes. There's something about hills, she said. They catch the light different. Like the land's breathing. He leaned back against the post, wiping a streak of sawdust from his jaw. I used to sit up on the ridge there after supper, just sit. My father said it was a waste of time. But I think I figured out more sitting still than I ever did riding fence. Mara rested her hands on her hips. You talk about him sometimes, your father. Holden's eyes narrowed a little, not defensive, just guarded. He wasn't cruel, just couldn't settle his bones. Always chasing something better. Left Clara and me to figure out what stayed behind. She stepped closer, her voice low. Do you think he was ever happy? Holden looked past her toward the barn with its weathered boards and sagging eaves. I think he wanted to be. But wanting's not enough, not if you can't hold still long enough to know when you've got it. Shifting dust along the orchard floor, stirring the leaves just enough to make them whisper. That evening, Mara stayed out after the sun dipped. She stood at the edge of the field, watching the last light catch in the folds of the hills. The air smelled like warm earth and wood smoke. She heard Holden's steps behind her before he spoke. Clara said she's keeping Daisy home from church this week, a cough she doesn't want passed around. Mara looked back at him. You still going? He nodded. Figured I'd take the wagon in the morning, rides easier with two. She hesitated. I haven't been to church since I left the East. Don't have to say anything if you don't want, just sit a while, hear the hymns. She studied him for a moment. All right. The church was small, clapboard with a bell that rang sharp and clear in the thin morning air. Holden tied the horses while Mara waited by the stoop, smoothing the creases from her skirt. Inside, the pews were worn smooth by years of use, and the pastor's voice carried without effort. She didn't sing, but she closed her eyes during the verses, letting the sound settle in her chest like warm water. Afterward, they lingered at the edge of the yard while others greeted one another. A woman with silver rings on her fingers offered Mara a jar of pickled beets, and a man with a limp asked Holden if he'd be willing to trade for feed corn next week. It was the kind of talk that came from years of knowing who would show up and who wouldn't. On the way home, Holden let the horses keep an easy pace. You fit in, he said. Mara adjusted the hem of her dress where it had bunched at her knees. I don't know if I do. You don't need to be like anyone else to belong. She looked out at the fields passing by. I keep waiting for someone to ask who I was before, why I came, but no one does. They'll see who you are now, he said. That's enough. That night she sat at the kitchen table long after Clara had gone to bed, her hands resting on the smooth wood. Holden came in from the barn, the scent of hay clinging to him, and paused at the doorway. I've been thinking, she said, not turning. He waited. I want to stay. He stepped closer. For a while or for good? I don't know what good looks like yet, she said. But I want to find out here, he nodded, quiet. And if I learn what I want along the way, she added, I'll say it plain. Holden's voice was low. Then I'll wait till you do. She looked up at him and for the first time didn't feel like she had to protect what she felt, not from him. I don't think you'll have to wait long. He didn't reach for her. He just stood there, close enough for her to feel the calm he carried, and that, more than anything, told her what she needed to know. The first frost came early that year, crisping the edges of the cottonwood leaves before September had finished its stretch. Mara pulled a shawl over her shoulders as she stepped outside, the breath rising from her lips in faint clouds. Holden was already at the corral, repairing a length of rail that had bowed outward under weight. She crossed the yard, boots leaving narrow prints in the brittle grass. You're up early, she said, stopping by the fence. Colt got loose last night, he replied, fitting a fresh board into place. I found him halfway to the ridge fence. Took my good halter rope with him. She leaned against the post. Did he come back easy, eventually? He wiped the back of his hand across his brow. Stubborn thing, doesn't know what's good for him yet. Mara smiled faintly. I know the feeling. Holden didn't laugh, but a warmth passed across his face. I was thinking, she said, about that patch of land near the bend in the creek. It catches the morning light, could be good for planting. Too rocky for grain, he said. I wasn't thinking grain. I was thinking flowers. He looked at her, eyes steady. You thinking about staying through spring then? She didn't look away. I'm thinking about next year and the one after. He nodded once, slow. Then we'll clear it. They worked the rest of the morning side by side, digging out stones and hauling them to the edge of the property line. The soil was shallow in places, but beneath the top layer, it held promise. Mara knelt in the dirt, fingers tracing the shape of the earth, her palms dusted with dry clay. I never had anything of my own, she said. Not really. Holden crouched beside her. You do now. She looked at him, the air quiet between them. I've been thinking about something else, she said. He waited. I don't want to stay in the spare room anymore. Holden's jaw shifted slightly. All right. I want a home, she said. Not a borrowed space, not a room down the hall, not something temporary. You'll have it, he said. We'll build it. Together. That night, Clara brought out a rolled bundle from the cedar chest in her room. It had belonged to her and Holden's mother, a quilt stitched with faded pieces of dresses and shirts long since gone. When Mara unfolded it across the bed in the room that would soon be hers and Holden's, she ran her hand over the threadbare patchwork and felt a kind of stillness settle in her chest that she had never known before. The wedding was small. Clara hemmed Mara's dress with care, and Holden shaved the morning of, standing outside with the pump water so cold it numbed his hands. They were married under the cottonwood, the same one where they'd once shared a peach, and a silence that had grown into something solid. The preacher's words were few. Holden took her hands in his and his thumb brushed over her knuckles, rough against smooth. When he said yes, his voice didn't tremble. When she said yes in return, hers didn't either. Afterward, Clara served apple cake and Daisy toddled between guests with sticky fingers. The sun dipped low behind the hills, casting the barn in long shadow. Holden wrapped his arm around Mara's waist as they stood on the porch, watching the light change. I never thought I'd marry, he said. Neither did I, she replied. He looked at her. Not like this. She rested her head against his shoulder. Exactly like this. That winter, the snow came heavy, but the house stayed warm. Holden built a cabinet for her sewing things with shelves deep enough for folded cloth and hooks for spools. Mara learned how to bake bread that didn't fall in the middle, and Holden learned to eat it without complaint when it did. They planted lilacs in the spring, near the edge of the creek bend. It took time for them to take root, but eventually the green shoots pushed through the soil. Holden marked the spot with a small wooden post. On it, he carved a single word, home. Mara spent her mornings in the garden and her afternoons in the orchard, pruning the new trees they'd grafted together. At night they would sit by the fire, her head tucked beneath his chin, his arm draped around her waist like it had always belonged there. In time, the coop filled with hens, and Clara's family moved to a place of their own, nearer to the schoolhouse. Daisy still came to visit, dragging her doll behind her, calling Holden uncle with a giggle that never lost its charm. Mara never wrote to the man who'd left her at the station. She didn't need to. She had built a life from the dust of that morning and had never looked back. On their third spring together, Mara stood by the lilacs, now blooming in soft clusters the color of twilight. Holden came up behind her, his hands gentle at her waist. You did it, he said. We did, she corrected. And when he kissed her, it was not the kind of kiss that trembles with doubt or asks for forgiveness. It was quiet, sure, and full of something that had taken root long before words had found it. They lived that way steadily, sweetly, with the kind of love that doesn't need to be spoken to be known. Every fence line they rode, every meal they shared, every silence they filled with glance and gesture, it was all part of something lasting. And when the world turned again, season into season, the only thing that changed was how much more they belonged to it, to each other. Forever.